Hello and welcome. You're watching the NewsTrack. I'm Rahul. It's been a month since the Hamas's dastardly attack on Israel shocked the world. The Israel Defense Forces have gone into Gaza in the second phase of military operations. How long is this battle likely to go on for? What should the world expect next? To talk about this, we've got an international roundtable on the NewsTrack. I'll be joined on this broadcast by the international spokesperson of the IDF, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner. With us also will be Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom, who some said Zomlot, and we'll have some top Indian military experts joining us to talk about 1 month on what should you expect next in the Israeli battle against the Hamas. It was exactly 30 days ago when the Hamas unleashed carnage in southern Israel. From the ground, air and the sea, Hamas terrorists killed nearly 1,400 Israelis. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, ordered an all-out invasion of Gaza. A month on, Israeli forces have now surrounded Gaza city. Over 200 hostages continue to be in the Hamas's custody, and the theater of war seems to be expanding.
1 month since Israel was caught by surprise. 1 month since over 1,400 Israelis were murdered. 1 month since Hamas terrorists brought the Jewish state to its knees. What has followed has been a month of an awakened beast. A grieving but galvanized Israel has been on an uninterrupted campaign of retribution, pounding Hamas strongholds in the Gaza Strip mercilessly. The endgame, total obliteration of Hamas, remains elusive. But Israel says it has managed to kill at least 3,000 Hamas terrorists.
We are targeting their infrastructure that is unfortunately embedded in civilian structures as well, underneath them, and they're hiding under population, cynically using them as human shields. So it's not an easy mission, as you can imagine. It's not an easy mission. This is why we have ground forces in Gaza right now.
Israel's ground offensive into the Gaza has thus far killed at least 37 IDF soldiers. And with the Israeli tank forces now at the doorstep of the sprawling Hamas stronghold of Gaza City, the most difficult part of this battle now lies ahead.
Gaza is a massive ground operation of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and they are taking a bite after a bite from what was under Hamas control, and slowly, they are going to take over the Gaza Strip. I don't know yet what will happen after that, but I'm sure that Gaza City will fall very soon to the hands of the IDF.
Most believed that Israel would be able to wrap up its Hamas hunt in a month, but with Gaza split in the middle, and the Hamas still making use of its vast tunnel network to keep the Israelis at bay, a long and hard campaign of urban warfare looms large. And while Israel presses on in the Gaza Strip, the architects of the Hamas terror attack continue to evade capture, sitting in foreign havens. For a month now, the battle has remained confined to Israel. But with Israel's fronts with Lebanon and Syria hotting up progressively, could the coming months see this war explode beyond Israel's borders? Bureau Report, India Today.
It's been 1 month since the Hamas's attack on Israel shocked the whole world. The IDF has gone in all guns blazing into the Gaza Strip. Where does this conflict go from here? What are the key X factors which could change the shape of the conflict? And what does the world need to be most wary of? To talk about this, I'm joined on the broadcast by Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, international spokesperson of the Israel Defense Forces. With us also is Ambassador Hussam Zaid Zomlod, the ambassador of the Palestinian Authority to the United Kingdom. Abhijit Iyer Mitra joins us, senior research fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. And we've got Lieutenant General Rameshwar Yadav, from a military perspective, former Director General Infantry of the Indian Army. I want to go across Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner first. Colonel Lerner, I want to ask you about your battle plans and your own assessment 1 month on about how this war is shaping up from the IDF's perspective in terms of achieving your mission objectives. Are you on schedule, ahead of schedule, or do you think progress has been much slower than you would have liked it to?
Forward every day, getting closer and closer to our objective, indeed destroying and dismantling Hamas as a governing authority, as a terrorist army. At the end of this, they will no longer have that power or the ability to launch and strike and use the Gaza Strip as a staging ground against our people.
You may be able to kill the top Hamas military and political commanders, but the biggest question is, how will you root out the ideology of the Hamas and the concern that each civilian who's killed, his relatives potentially become more and more hardline, and that the idea of the Hamas stays alive even if the military wing of the Hamas is destroyed by the Israel army?
No, the ideology isn't our challenge. The challenge is restoring safety and security to the people. This terrorist organization can never ever wield the powers of government to build a terrorist army that conduct, based on the powers of the government, the ability to brutally massacre, butcher, rape, behead, dismember, and abduct Israelis.
One of the biggest questions globally is about what happens in Gaza the day after being when the Israel Defense Forces have won, militarily established control once again over the Gaza Strip. Then, have you started thinking seriously within the IDF about what happens next? Who runs Gaza once the Hamas has been militarily vanquished?
Now, Israel does not want to rule Gaza. This has been, since day one, we've been saying this. We left Gaza in order not to return, but the security reality, the security regime, that needs to change. Ideally, the Palestinians of Gaza would have to determine their own destiny of how they want to be ruled. But it cannot be with a terrorist entity that uses the powers of government in order to attack us and launch a war against us. The reality, of course, we understand it will be a long process. It won't be a short war because of the challenges of urban warfare, of a terrorist organization that has deeply embedded itself within the civilian arena, that is cynically exploiting the civilian arena to the benefit of its operations, of its ruthless, merciless operations. And this is precisely what we're up against. And so we understand it's going to be a long process, and there may be intermediate times that the IDF will control, secure, and make sure that Hamas can never have that power again. For Israel, I would say, especially in the aftermath of the massacre of October 7th, any security reality on the ground will be better than the one that existed on October the 6th.
One of the realities on the ground is that 240-odd Israeli citizens are still hostage with the Hamas, and we've seen continuing and increasing protests in different parts of Israel demanding that the government and the army do more to bring these hostages back to safety. How are you viewing these protests and the concerns about the IDF not doing enough to try and bring these Israeli hostages back home?
Hostages are one component of our war effort. The mission objective is to bring them home safely and securely. Hamas are responsible for their well-being. We have demanded that the International Committee of the Red Cross have access to them to assess their well-being. I'm not aware that that has happened yet. Of course, their presence in the Gaza Strip is an important component of our operational activities and planning. But I would say that we are utilizing all of the tools and capabilities that the IDF has in order to try and find, locate, and rescue. We've already rescued one of the hostages, Ori Megidish, from Hamas's hands. And indeed, there's a huge challenge that this will that this poses for any military. There is obviously also the diplomatic efforts, which are ongoing. Ultimately, Hamas have to release the hostages. They have to release them now.
Okay, that's what your expectation at least is. Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah spoke of all options being open, didn't indicate that the war would escalate, but said that's something the Hezbollah is ready for. How does the IDF view the prospect of a two-front or a three-front conflict?
Hezbollah needs to operate very cautiously. They need to watch very closely how we're dismantling and destroying Hamas in Gaza. Indeed, over the last month, we've seen increased activities on their behalf against us. Yesterday, an Israeli was killed in an exchange or in an attack that originated from southern Lebanon. Hezbollah needs to choose if they are a representative, a tool of Iran, or a representative or a tool of Lebanon. They have a huge impact on what happens in Lebanon. I think they need to decide who they listen to. And my message to the Lebanese government would be one of, you need to take control and take charge of what Hezbollah is doing on the south. They are jeopardizing the sanctity of Lebanon. And so, yes, there is a concern that there will be an escalation. We've seen an escalation over the last month. Hezbollah have conducted attacks with anti-tank guided missiles, rockets, mortars, sniper fire, machine gun fire, drones. All of these have happened in the last month. We are taking every necessary step in order to be strong in our defenses. So both evacuating people from the area, all of the towns and communities across the 5-kilometer radius from the border have been evacuated, and we've over 80% of the people have left. In the end of the day, we are reinforcing our forces on the ground, in the air and at sea. We've only less than half of our air forces utilized in the south against Hamas. So we have a strong capability to engage Hezbollah if necessary. We don't want to, but we are prepared to if need be.
One last question before I go across to our guests in India and the ambassador of the Palestinian Authority, Kanwal. Massive pressure now on Israel to declare a humanitarian ceasefire. Anthony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, was in the Middle East, Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, all asking for Israel to pause hostilities to allow for a humanitarian ceasefire.
Anybody asking for a humanitarian ceasefire but not explicitly addressing the issue of hostages is their recommendations or appeals fall on empty ears here in Israel. Of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu said and echoed this yesterday. From our perspective, the humanitarian effort is part of our war effort. And indeed, we're creating evacuation corridors from north to south so that people can exit the north to go to safer area in the south of Gaza Strip. We are making sure that the humanitarian assistance and aid continues to flow into Gaza from Rafah, and about 100 trucks now daily are coming in. This is part of the ongoing effort. And we're maintaining open channels with the international humanitarian organizations in order to mitigate the effects of the war. At the end of the day, this is a war, and we are determined to defeat Hamas, destroy their capabilities. And indeed, they have, as a governing authority, I think we've lost him.
For a Palestinian perspective, I want to go across to Hussam Said Zomlot, the ambassador of the Palestinian Authority to the United Kingdom. Mr. Zomlot, welcome. It's been 1 month since the Hamas's dastardly attack across Israel. Every single call that's been made to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for there to be some kind of a humanitarian ceasefire has been rejected. The IDF at this time determined not to stop till the time the Hamas has been wiped out. From a Palestinian perspective, how do you look at the last month and where we've reached so far, sir?
Well, right from the beginning of this, we have been warning the world that Israel, with its current prime minister and government, will only use what happened for a long-term plan of actually waging a war of genocide against the Palestinian people. And what has happened since the 7th of October proves that Israel has been hysteric. We have heard genocidal rhetoric and discourse from Israel. And regrettably, some Western governments, primarily the US and the UK and others, have really at the beginning gave some sort of a green light for such an assault. And it was interpreted by those fanatics in the Israeli government as a carte blanche to do what they have been doing over the last month. This war of Israel is not against Hamas. This war of Israel is against the Palestinian people. As you know, more than 10,000 innocent civilians have lost their lives. Almost half of them are children. An utter destruction of homes, of hospitals, of schools, universities, utter destruction of the infrastructure, the unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe in every sense. The UN and UN agencies are telling us horrifying accounts of sheer human suffering. Hospitals are running out of generators and fuel and electricity. You have babies in incubators that might die because of these incubators running out of energy. And you're talking about the break out of diseases among populations. Israel has forced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to leave their homes to the south under the pretext that the south is safe. Yet they have been bombarding the south heavily, killing hundreds of Palestinian innocent civilians.
But Ambassador Zomlot, when leaders of the Hamas have been asked about, for example, something like tunnels, saying that, you know, would civilians in Gaza get to use the tunnels? They've been reported to say, no, those tunnels are for Hamas fighters. The civilians are the responsibility of the United Nations. So it's not as if the Hamas, which is, for all practical purposes, the ruler of Gaza, has been wanting to take care of the Gazan civilians. They're only taking care of their military infrastructure and their fighters. They've left the civilians to their own mercy, so much so that in some cases civilians haven't been allowed to leave because the Hamas wanted some protection to save themselves from the IDF's attack.
You go and ask a Hamas spokesperson for that. I'm the wrong person to ask that question. However, the only ruler of Gaza is Israel. Israel fully occupies Gaza. It decides who comes in, who comes out. It decides even the level of food, water, electricity, telecommunication, internet, what have you. And you know Gaza has been under draconian siege by Israel for the last 16 years. And therefore, Israel is in a state of full military occupation of Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, as per international consensus for the last 56 years. Now, as an occupier, Israel has the responsibility, the full responsibility, as per international resolutions and international provisions, to protect civilians under its military occupation. What we have seen over the last month, as we have been seeing over a 75-year period, Israel deliberately targets civilians. This is a military doctrine in Israel. Whenever there is such a confrontation, they go after the civilians, they go after the civil structures, and the doctrine goes like, once they terrorize the civilians, they would pressure the fighters. And the UN has provided shelters for the Palestinian people in Gaza over the last month, but Israel has been bombarding these shelters. I met senior UN officials the last couple of days, and they give me an unimaginable account of what is happening in their shelters. They have no fuel for their trucks to bring water or electricity. Diseases are spreading, and the situation is simply horrific in every sense. So we must stop here blaming the victims all the time, and we must stop finding excuses for the Israeli atrocious, murderous attacks against innocent people that has been reported all over the world, including your own channel. What is happening is crimes against humanity. What is happening is tantamount to genocide. And now what we need is first to ceasefire, to immediate ceasefire, to stop the aggression against our people. We need to think about how do we exchange hostages and relieve people. We need to think about a huge, massive humanitarian aid and assistance corridors from all over the world including from our brothers and sisters in India, to elevate the unprecedented human suffering in Gaza caused by Israel. We need to think
one of the big questions, Ambassador, that's being asked.
We need to think about what Israel is doing in the West Bank. It's not just Gaza. We need to follow what the Israeli illegal militias, settlers, wreaking havoc in the West Bank, rampage in every sense, killing many Palestinian innocent people as we speak. And therefore, this is not just the Gaza situation. This is all over the Palestinian territory. And therefore, we must get the record right, and we must not parrot what Israel comes out with, especially that the Israeli politicians have been hysteric, genocidal, and we need grown-ups in this conversation. And it must be countries like India, like other major countries, that really provide sanity now before it's too late. And we need to bring everything back to the root causes, and we need to tell Israel and the world that it is about time that the Palestinian people regain their rights. It's about time that the occupation ends. It's about time that international resolutions are implemented, and it is about time that international accountability is upheld, and everybody who commits war crimes are brought to justice.
One of the big questions is what happens the day after. It's quite likely, given the military prowess of the Israel Defense Forces, that they will be able to vanquish the Hamas in this war, and then Israel will once again control Gaza. The question is, will the Palestinian Authority step in to administer Gaza along with an Arab coalition? A lot of conversation at this time globally about who will run Gaza once the IDF wins. Will the Palestinian Authority want to be a part of this effort?
Gaza is part of the Palestinian occupied territory, and the people in Gaza are Palestinian people, our people, and the Palestinian Authority never left Gaza. The main services, be it health, be it education, be it what have you, is provided by the Palestinian Authority. So this talk is again a spend from Israel. In fact, Israel just cut funding, not funding, that's the wrong word, our own revenues, our own money that we send to Gaza. So Israel is not really undermining or eradicating Hamas. Israel is eradicating the Palestinian people. They are eradicating our families, our structures, our institutions. They are eradicating the Palestinian people hope, and the state of helplessness and hopelessness will create much more longer complications. That's why we call for an immediate ceasefire, and that's why we want a focus on the long term, because everything we do right now will affect the long term. We need to give people hope, and hope can only come from a confirmation that the oppression and suppression of the Palestinian people have got to end. It's been too long, my friend, 75 years, that this is about time when the world wakes up and say enough is enough, and that the lesson that we learn, that there is no security solution to this, no military solution to this, and there will never be a military solution. And who is going to take over Gaza? The Palestinian people will take over Gaza, and the Palestinian people have their legitimate representatives. But that legitimate representation, which is the PLO, will only be able to control all the Palestinian territories, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza once liberated, and that should be the state of Palestine that would provide protection for our people in Gaza, in Jerusalem, and in the West Bank. The way Israel talks about it is rejected completely and utterly. We do not accept partial or security solutions to Gaza. It has to be political and legal, where Gaza is part of the state of Palestine, and the government of the state of Palestine is the PLO, and we are ready to liberate the land and take over the responsibility of providing protection and services to our people everywhere.
On the question of escalation, one of the big questions this time is, 1 month on, is there likely to be escalation on the part of the Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Syrians, and potentially even Iran? From your perspective, we saw Hassan Nasrallah make very combatful comments, but not necessarily signaling direct confrontation. How do you view in the PLO the question of escalation?
The Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian cause is a Palestinian matter. And this is a people struggle for freedom, for liberation, for independence, for rights, legitimate rights. And we need the support of the Arab world. We need the support of the international community, including India. And we have a historic relationship with India during the non-alliance movement and until now. We need the support of the people of the world, like during the anti-apartheid movement of South Africa. We need support in the moral sense, in the political sense, and in the legal sense, and the popular sense, as you have seen in the streets of London, of New York, Washington, of Paris and Berlin, of New Delhi, and everywhere in the world that we need. But we do not need any country in this world, including Iran, to hijack our cause or to use our cause for their own calculations. We need support and solidarity, and the Palestinian people struggle is upon us. We need to make sure that we continue the struggle and to fight for our future with the support for our rights, not for any regional calculations.
Okay. So we've heard from the Israel Defense Forces, we've heard from the ambassador of the Palestinian Authority, and I want to go across to Lieutenant General Rameshwar Yadav and Abhijit Iyer Mitra at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. Abhijit, any sense at all at this moment of how long this war could go on for? It's obviously a question that the Israelis or the Palestinians don't want to think about, because Israel wants to finish the Hamas. No matter how long it takes, Palestine wants this war to end. We've seen the Russia-Ukraine war just drag on much longer than anybody internationally expected, maybe even much more than Putin expected. Your best sense of how long we could see this military conflict go on for?
Thanks, Rahul. So, I'm expecting a minimum of at least 6 to 8 months, just based on the statements and the mission statement made by the Israelis. Because if they want to wipe out Hamas, look, the bigger tunnels, and we know there are very big tunnel systems. There's a whole underground city out there. Most of them are connected. So, for example, the one under Shifa Hospital, for example, has several nodes which are mutually connected. You pour water down it, recycled seawater down it. You've pretty much got it. The problem is there are hundreds of other, tunnels, fighting holes. I mean, we've seen these, tunnels from which Hamas fighters come out and place RPG rounds right on the tank, bypassing its active protection system defenses and things like that. So removing all of that is going to take a very long time. 6 to 8 months is the absolute minimum, assuming a consistent and overwhelming deployment of force of the current levels of about 560,000 in full mobilization. If it comes down, obviously, then the thing goes on much longer. Now, remember, there are two parts to this. They first have to do it 6 to 8 months for the north alone, and then 6 to 8 months for the south, when the population is transferred. We don't know how long the population filtering is going to happen, because they need to figure out who's Hamas, who's not, based on checking before they allow those in the south to move back up north. So it's being done as a sort of, almost like an ink blot, the reverse of an ink blot strategy, where you clean out one part, expand, create the ink blot completely, then move, and so on and so forth. I think totally this might just extend to about 2 to 3 years if this total eradication is humanly possible.
Do you think it is, given the fact that each civilian who's killed has relatives who would A, be very angry, frustrated, possibly more prone to radicalization than they've been in the past, and therefore, while you can take down top military commanders of the IDF, what about the ideology of the Hamas? Does that sink in even deeper? Or do you think Palestinians will also try and push back because they've seen the kind of misery, pain and death it's brought them?
Sure. Rahul, we never really know with these things. Everybody believed that, conquering Japan or conquering Germany after World War II, which was the kind of complete occupation that Israel is now looking at again, would, lead to radicalization. In fact, American forces had a very elaborate plans drawn out for a post-occupation insurgency in Germany and Japan. Those did happen. And on the other hand, places like Afghanistan or Iraq, we knew, because this happened in our lifetime, we saw exactly what kind of insurgencies did happen. I would suspect that simply because of the sheer bulk of Israeli numbers and the sheer small size of Gaza, and almost, a 1:5 ratio kind of Israeli troops is to Gazans. There's about 2.5 million Gazans, and full mobilization is 560,000 Israeli troops. the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan might not be applicable here. It might be more like Germany, Japan, just that overwhelming concentration of force. We also need to be clear about what's coming after this in order to make that determination. Because from what the Israelis are telling us, that there will be a completely new civilian authority with no connection whatsoever to Hamas, which could again lead to a lot of good things if it's done properly. It can't be like, Paul Bremer in Iraq dismissing the entire Baath party. And if you remember, the Baath party used to be quite secular. They were the only country that used to vote for India in OIC resolutions condemning us on Kashmir. But then it was the same Baath party that got dismissed, because in order to get a job in Iraq, you had to be a member of the Baath party. Everybody who was in the Baath party gets dismissed, and that Baath party colonel becomes the colonel of Al-Qaeda and, massively aids the insurgency out there. You can't have that kind of decision making. Let's see what happens.
Okay. Lieutenant General Rameshwar Yadav, from your military lens, sitting at a distance, observed from an operational, strategic and tactical perspective in the way the war is shaped up, how long do you see these hostilities and this war go on for, sir?
Rahul, it is a politico-military audit that we have to do. Let's just very briefly, you see on 7th October, Hamas, they struck Israel. So they were very well prepared. They had done their homework very well, and they executed the operations, offensive operations, very well. And thereafter, they retreated into a massive built-up area that you have. And the defense potential of a built-up area is tremendous. It requires a lot of time to clear. It entails a lot of casualties, which Israel probably cannot sustain. You see, what has happened after the 7th October, they surrounded Gaza, 35 kilometers by 10 to 15 kilometers, all right. But for one fortnight, they do not move forward, other than the surrounding this. Primarily, they wanted to plan from where they have to attack. And in a built-up area, I must clarify to your viewers, that attack has got to be astride the roads, all right? And all these roads are going to be covered up by these tall buildings you have, multi-story buildings you have. Each and every window can be converted into a pillbox. There'll be small arms. They're going to be anti-tank fire from there. They are going to erect roadblocks with mines and IEDs, etc. So it is a very difficult task, but not only this, from troops to task-wise, for clearing each house, you require section to a platoon worth of forces, and that too after a very heavy casualty. And once you have captured these areas, you have to retain these. So you need more troops. So therefore, the requirement of troops are going to be colossal. That is one. And second, the time required to clear up the entire Gaza, in my perspective, it is very, very difficult. You have to see, in this kind of situation, the three things you have to consider. One is the demography, those are topography and the geography. As far as topography is concerned and the demography is concerned, it favors Hamas because they belong to this area and all the Palestinians are there, their support base. So they can...
How much of Hamas's military capabilities, according to you, Lieutenant General Yadav, how much of Hamas's military capacity has been degraded in the past month, and how much of it still stays fighting fit as the Israelis circle Gaza? How much of a military pushback are you expecting from Hamas in its current state?
You see, Hamas is going to fight and they're going to survive to another day, all right? So they fight on one front wherever Israelis attacks are coming, and thereafter it is their own area. They know the complete terrain and they can shift their force. Wherever they see there is an offensive coming in, it is going to be a pitched battle. And near parallel, what you can see in this kind of situation is what happened in Mosul. It took 9 months to clear it. Wherein in Mosul, the IS fighters, they were generally outsiders and the township was generally vacated. But here, the complete population is there, the multi-story building and the massive buildings. Clearing them is a big problem. Either you destroy all of them. For that, the kind of ordinance you require is colossal. Does Israel have that kind of ordinance? That is one point. And second point is, there is a war fatigue. You cannot carry on this kind of a fighting in built-up area for months and years together. So, in my perspective, what is happening as of now, the battle fatigue is already on. It is more of a stalemate. You see, yesterday evening, there is a message that we have reached the coast. So how much territory they have taken? 10 odd kilometers, that also onto the sides. So it will take time. All right, in case this campaign carries on, in my perspective, it is unlikely to carry on. The likelihood of ceasefire, because more civilian casualties, the perception of Israel being a victim is changing into an aggressor.
No, but you're saying that there's likely to be a ceasefire. While that might be a rational way of looking at things, Abhijit Iyer, given the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has said very clearly that there's no question of ceasefire till the Hamas continues to breathe, is a ceasefire possible, or will the Israelis be able to bash on regardless of international pressure?
Rahul, you see, the military objective which has been set by Israel is, in my perception, is not likely to be achieved. The reason being, you are trying to finish an ideology. Ideology is in the mind. For a military objective, if you say, all right, capture area so and so, it is feasible. But capturing the minds of people and all those who have highly indoctrinated on their religious cause, it is very difficult. All right. And plus, after fighting on the front, the Hamas cadres, they can march into the civil population. It is very difficult to recognize who's a civilian and who's a combatant. So it is a very, very difficult order. And I don't think it can be Hamas can be finished. They will survive in some form or other. Initially, yes, because the kind of destruction that has been impacted on them, it may create a small window for some kind of a reconciliation. And
okay, so you're saying a reconciliation is likely, but Abhijit Iyer, look at the ISIS. The brutal means deployed by the US and the UK led to the ISIS being degraded to the extent where at this moment it's a much lesser threat than it once was at its peak?
Absolutely. Look, let's go back to the previous question, because this international pressure that we're seeing, let's first break down what it is. Do you see any countries in private pressurizing Israel, at least the ones that have massive trade with it? I think the only one I've seen actually kick down on Israel right now is China, right? And Israel is also reconsidering its entire relationship with China. Russia's playing both sides, as it always does. The Arab countries in private are egging on Israel, because don't forget, especially the monarchical states, they hate Hamas. The only two monarchies that that get along with Hamas, have some kind of a modus vivendi with Hamas, are Qatar and Jordan. Jordan is a gone case in the Israeli diplomatic worldview, because ever since they tried to annex the West Bank in 1950, 2/3 of Jordan's population is actually Palestinian or of Palestinian origin. Qatar, again, is almost irrelevant in the Israeli diplomatic and military calculus. We also need to go back to what America has said. They have put out warnings to both Hezbollah and to Iran, telling them that the main reason that their fleet is deploying both to the Mediterranean, the fifth fleet is being put out to sea out of Bahrain, is to prevent any escalation by Iran or Hezbollah against Israel. I think there's going to be a significant amount of diplomatic support, at least as long as we saw for Ukraine, so maybe about 8 months to a year, year and a half. And then obviously, if it's an open-ended operation, I think Israel is very aware of this, that if it's an open-ended operation, that support will wither away, wane, and ultimately dissipate. It will also dissipate internally within Israel. Don't forget, Rahul, we saw South Lebanon. You remember when Ehud Olmert, or was it Ariel Sharon, who withdrew from South Lebanon? There were mothers of troops killed in South Lebanon, pressurizing the Israeli government in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, and things like that. So these things come with a finite shelf life. I would say, again, 6 to 8 months minimum, say up to a year, year and 2 months maximum in terms of how long Israel can resist.
Well, we're in the realm of probability, but you've heard two sharp brains give us their insights on what they think might happen next and how long it may take. For the time being, Lieutenant General Rameshwar Yadav, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Ambassador Hussam Said Zomlut, and Lieutenant Colonel Lerner for joining me on the NewsTrack. Thank you very much. The national capital region continues to be shrouded by a thick grey layer of smog. The Punjab farm fires that reduced from last year are now zooming again. They're the single largest contributor to pollution in the national capital region. While stopgap measures like odd even have been brought back, our netas continue to pass the buck, making every one of us uneasy and finding it difficult to breathe.
Delhi can't be made to go through this year after year. Everything being done merely on paper. Stop the political blame game. This can't be a political battle. Young children are suffering. We are at zero patience level. The words of a furious Supreme Court issuing a stinging rap on the knuckles of Aam Aadmi Party governments in Delhi and Punjab. The top court has come down heavily on Aam Aadmi Party governments in the two states, terming some of its measures like the odd-even scheme as mere optics, lashing out at their failures to contain pollution and the raging farm fires, pointing out that young children are suffering because of politics played by netas. The Supreme Court has asked Delhi and neighbouring states to stop stubble burning immediately, making the chief secretaries and local police directly culpable. The Supreme Court also took note of India Today's report on locked smog towers in Delhi built at a cost of 23 crore rupees, seeking their immediate functioning and setting a November 10th deadline to curb the deathly pollution in the national capital region.
The contention point between the Bharatiya Janata Party and Aam Aadmi Party, the smoke tower near the CP, would soon be operationalized. Today, Supreme Court, while hearing the petition related to Delhi air pollution, has asked DPCC to operationalize this tower, which was built in 2021 and was handed over to the people of Delhi by Delhi CM Arvind Kejriwal. This was built on the cost of 20 crore, and this tower is around 24-meter high, which was meant to purify air around 1 kilometer radius of this tower. But later DPCC had said that this is ineffective, this is a white elephant, and they have closed the operations of this tower. But now, after Supreme Court has asked to operationalize this tower in a situation when Delhi is witnessing more than 400 AQI, and the AQI has reached to the alarming high, this has come as a good news for the people living around this tower.
A red-faced Aam Aadmi Party government said it would implement the Supreme Court order, but is now facing political attacks.
देखिए, अभी सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने जो अपने ऑब्जर्वेशन दिए हैं, उस ऑब्जर्वेशन के साथ उनका डिटेल ऑर्डर जो भी आता है, हमारी सरकार उसको फॉलो करेगी, चाहे यहाँ पर हो या पंजाब में। और हमारा ये भी निवेदन है कि सभी सरकारें उसको फॉलो करें, क्योंकि सभी लोग मिल करके जब प्रयास करेंगे तो मुझे लगता है कि पोल्यूशन का समाधान हम निकाल पाएंगे।
अरविंद केजरीवाल और आम आदमी पार्टी ने केवल दोषारोपण किया है, कभी केंद्र पर दोष, कभी उत्तर प्रदेश, हरियाणा, दिवाली, सभी लोगों पर दोष डाला, अपनी जिम्मेदारी नहीं उठाई। और आज इसलिए सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी फटकार लगाई है, कहा है ये ब्लेम गेम बंद कीजिए, अपनी जिम्मेदारी उठाइए।
Delhi NCR has been breathing literally poisoned air for days now, with air quality staying firmly in the red. Punjab has so far reported over 60% farm fires this season in just 1 week, with stubble burning increasing by over 35% in the first week of November, jumping from over 7,600 last week to almost 12,000 now. Will the Supreme Court intervention unchoke India's capital? Bureau Report, India Today.
This is where I wrap up the news track tonight. Remember, tomorrow is when the India Today group will get you the India Today Telangana roundtable. So I'll be in Hyderabad. We look at all the big newsmakers from Telangana politics. Join us in Hyderabad for the biggest build-up to the Telangana elections. An exciting battle on currently in Hyderabad. So do catch our live and continuing coverage all across the India Today network on Wednesday, the 8th of November. See you there.